Hello and welcome back to Rev Endurance Sports and a deeper dive into the Ritchey Montebello frame set that was just released today, July the 30th of 2024. I've been talking about this frame since Sea Otter back in April, and it's finally available for purchase, but the numbers are very, very limited per size. So if you want one, please get in touch ASAP. Email is usually in the description, but it's revcycling@gmail.com. Okay, let's get into this. First thing is, what do you think about the look of it? I think it's classic looking. I mean, it's supposed to be a randonneur Audex type of bike, but some people have a thing for level top tubes and they don't like a sloping top tube. I've experienced that in the past. Some of my bikes, my older traditional looking bikes, they're new, but the traditional looking bikes, level top tubes on them. So, but Ritchey goes with a sloping top tube on a lot of their bikes, and you have to think about the ability to fit more riders with a sloping top tube. So for some of you with shorter inseams, it is really nice to have a steel frame that will have a sloping top tube, because if you're trying to ride one of the older bikes, it's a level top tube, you can't even straddle it. All right. But the other thing is you have to consider, at least for this bike, the tire capacity. And so when you're putting on bigger and bigger tires, the bike in general gets taller and taller and taller. Right? So just something to consider about sloping top tubes. So the first thing is the look of it. And let's see. The next thing is you can see that it's built with the classic line of Ritchey componentry. So I can see what looks to be the classic WCS disc brake wheels. I see the stem, I see the seat post. These are obviously suggestions. It's how they built it up. This is a frame set only, this is available as a frame set only, so you can build it any way you want. You can put carbon componentry on this. You can put deep section wheels on this. You know, this is just built up in a classic look, but if you wanted to ride carbon wheels, you wanted to ride low section, box rims, whatever you want. The world is your oyster when you have a frame set. And it looks like they built it with a microshift sword group set, which is a 10-speed group set, but more on drivetrain compatibility in a few minutes, so just stick around. This just happens to be a very practical cable operated system. Cable for the shifters, cable for the brakes. Mechanical disc brakes work really well. I had them on my tandem for years, and you know, on some fast descents we're 65, 70 miles per hour on the tandem. We stopped just fine. So, okay. So we have that. And we'll talk more about compatibility. Oh, color. What do you folks think about the color? Hot sauce. So red, but they want to call it hot sauce. I think that's kind of cool. And let's look at the second photo, because I thought this was interesting. The second photo kind of speaks to me. I'm someone who does spirited randonneuring. I am not generally someone who takes the complete allotted time to do a randonneuring event. I like to do, you know, our 70 time frames, which is about 70% of the allotted amount of time. Depending on the course, I shoot for the R60, which is 60% of the allotted time. But it's very hard here in Southern California to hit that R60 because there's so much climbing on our randonneuring events. But this gentleman here, he's got his Shimano S-Fire shoes. He's got, you know, a very tight-fitting jersey. It's not typically what randonneurs look like, so I guess they're appealing to the market of someone who wants to do fast randonneuring. Because you can't load this up with a lot of cargo, baggage and stuff. So, and then the third photo, you can see the wiring right here, the hole going through the fork. Now, we're going to talk more about this fork a little later. You see the rack here, and the last photo, you know, just more of a look of the complete bike, and you'll notice there's no pannier racks or anything on the back end of the bike. All right, the next thing is the price. The price of this bike is $16.99, frame I should say, frame, fork, headset. $16.99. So this bike is sitting like right in the middle between the rim Road Logic, the disc Road Logic. So on the price continuum, the rim $15.99, $16.99 for this one, and then the disc brake Road Logic $17.99. So I'm curious how they came up with those pricing points, but you know, we'll find out in due time. So let's get into the ad copy. So this, you know, this is for a bike for, I thought this was interesting. The second and third paragraph have the most information for me. So for riders who ride longer than long distance rides. So long distance is subjective to some folks, but remember, this is a randonneuring focused bike. So, you know, if you're trying to do a grand randonnée, the distances start at 200K, 125 miles, 300K, 400K, 600K, 1200K for something like PBP. So long distance. And so like I said, this is the meat and potatoes here. So we have the next sentence really starts to flesh everything out. So we have the increased stack. We have a longer wheelbase. We have a lower bottom bracket. We have, notice here, stable ride for when you go sunset and sunrise again. So if you're a rando person, you know exactly what they're talking about. And it continues to talk about the fender and rack mounts that people have been asking for. Now they have a new fork, the carbon brevet fork, which was designed specifically for this frame. And we get into tire clearance a little bit. So 40 tire with fender and 40 without fender, 36 with a fender / mudguards. And you got mounting options for either a porteur or a low rider rack on the legs, and it has threaded drilling on the crown so you can install those rack lights, okay? And you got an internal dynamo hub, so you see that there. And it looks like they're going to move that forward to adventure forks. So like, let's say the Outback has an adventure fork, but it does not have that drilling for the internal drilling for the dynamo hubs. So it looks like that's going to move forward. And the 1 1/8 steer tube, I've talked about this many times in many Ritchey videos. They do not want to use a tapered head tube with big bottom bracket, big headset bearings and stiffness. That takes away from ride quality. So 1 1/8 carbon steer tube is what the format is for them. And you know, 1-inch steel fork would be magical if you could get one. You know, a Ritchey bike with a Ritchey steel bike with a 1-inch steel fork would just be an amazing combination. Unfortunately, I've never ridden one, but I have ridden 1-inch steel forks. I have one on, well, I have 3. Okay, so let's get on with the spec. All right, so triple butted. Now this is proprietary tubing, so we never really know what type of tubing they're using, so we don't know if it's Columbus or if it's Reynolds. At some point it was Tange, T-A-N-G-E, but we don't know, so this is one of those things. Triple butted means that the butting profiles at the head tube, seat tube cluster, places like that is going to be thicker and then thinner throughout the rest of the tube. This adds to ride quality. And TIG welded, you can just build a lighter frame than going with lugs. All right. The ED treatment, so a lot of folks, when you talk about steel frames, older steel frames, are like, oh, those things rust, I'll never have a steel frame again. Well, if you don't treat your bike with, let's say, a frame saver item, you might have this problem. Or if you ride it in the rain, or you know, it's exposed to moisture. I have a 1986 Bianchi with no rust on it, so it's fine, right? But these are treated, and you can still use the frame saver product. 27.2 seat post. This is, in my opinion, the best seat post widely available, because you have so many options as far as what seat posts you want to ride, and because it is 27.2, it'll flex a little bit more. And we go back to that sloping top tube again. The more your top tube slopes, the more seat post is exposed, the more compliance you might get from that seat post. All right. I've done some videos on the ergon seat post, which is kind of a leaf spring situation, and so you need to have more of that seat post exposed, and then you have suspension. 142 spacing, that's just now common. 12 for the front, 142 for the rear. It can accommodate 1x and 2x chainring. So this is interesting because if I'm doing randonneering, I'm going to go with a 2x, but you have the option for 1x. If you have flatter terrain and you don't ever really switch from your big ring to your little ring, then maybe you don't need a 2x. This is one thing I thought was interesting. It only has 2 bottle mounts. I thought they might put one underneath like they do on the Outback, because you know, you're doing rando events. A lot of times your controls are pretty spread apart. Depends where you ride, of course, and if there's heat. So that was interesting. But I guess you can mount them on the fork if you really needed to. Stealth wiring. So this is interesting because for many years, Ritchey would not have holes drilled into their tubes.
Is there any plan to have inner cable feature on Ritchey frame? No. One of the cool things about Ritchey's is the fact that we still do external cabling. It makes maintenance really easy. It makes diagnosing a problem with your shifting or brakes super simple. When you start running things internal, you get into some issues where, you know, now you have to drill a hole in, let's say, the down tube, and it has to be within the butting profile, and then braze in a port. What actually adds weight, and you're changing the, you know, intended butting for that frame. Now that once it's in there, how are you going to prevent it from rattling around? And it just keeps adding more weight to the bike. So for Ritchey, not something that we're going to look into.
External cable routing. Now, just like the release photo, if you don't want to do electronic componentry, then you still have the external cabling and you have the stops so that you can run mechanical shifting and mechanical disc brakes. Replaceable hanger. Now, generally with steel bikes, and especially on their Road Logic series, I keep looking over there because I have a Road Logic, my Road Logic sitting there. You have the frame, or I should say that the rear derailleur hanger is part of the frame. So you don't need a spare hanger, an actual hanger. So I recommend when people are buying a frame from any manufacturer that I sell, let's just buy that spare hanger right now so you just have it with you. If you're doing a rando event in a foreign country, you might as well have that with you in your toolkit. Done, right? Let's look at, they've always been very proud of their head tube and how much it saves. I guess 80 grams or something over any other type of tube. The seat tube clamp size. Now here's the thing. The derailleurs that you get for your front derailleur, if you go with a front derailleur, you'll need a clamp size, and I believe it's 31.6, but you need to reduce it down to 28.6. So 31.8, I believe, reduce it down. There are two sizes out there, so be careful. Don't buy the 34.9 one. Unless you're going to shim it until you can reduce it. But I've never done that. Or you just buy the clamp separately and then the derailleur separately. But those two things you're going to need. And again, if you're going 2x. And the torque value is very light. It's like 2.5 Newton meters. So it's really, really light. So you have to be careful with that. 68 mil English threaded bottom bracket. I just built up a Road Logic breakaway with, I believe it's a 7700 bottom bracket. I mean, I've had that thing like 20 years, I don't know how long, but I just built up my Road Logic breakaway with it because they just last forever. That's why you want that's why you want a threaded bottom bracket. All right. Crankset and or chain rings. So you can go from a 36 to a 50 if you do 1x, and you can run a 4630, which is considered a subcompact, or up to a standard of a 5339. So if you're running a SRAM setup where your chainring, a 48, that'll fit just nicely in this setup. And you've got your 10 cog in the back, so that's a very fast gearing combination. Chain lines 49, rack and fender mounts we talked about. We talked about the stop for the brake hoses and mechanical. And it always comes with a headset, so that's great. All right, the Ritchey fork we've talked about. The mounts for the rack. I asked on Facebook if there's any guidance or a spec for what is the weight capacity that you can put on these forks. So I'm waiting to hear that. I'm waiting to hear back on that. This is controversial for some folks, but 30 mil is what you should have underneath your stem, 3 centimeters. So you should not, it's a carbon steer tube, so you should not have, 4 or 5 centimeters of stack spacers underneath your stem. You do you, of course. Internal dynamo routing, we talked about that. 1 1/8 steer tube, we talked about that. Now this is an integrated crown race, so the fork, you do not need to pound in a crown race. It's already integrated into the fork, all right? And 100 millimeter spacing, that's the front. Okay, so that's normal stuff. Tire capability. Now this is always a thing, right? Because it just depends on what type of tire and rim combination. In other words, if your rim is a narrow rim, the older rims are like 17 millimeters, 18 millimeters, even 19 millimeters. That's really, really narrow these days. And so what happens is you're trying to achieve you're trying to install like a 30-something tire, and it just becomes this huge light bulb. So you want to widen out that internal dimension of that rim. So like the head wheels that I ride, they're 21 millimeters internal, 25 external. The Zeta wheels are a 20 millimeter internal, so really close to, you know, what you're getting these days for aluminum wheels. Now, I've got some Dura-Ace wheels here that are 24 internal, 28 external. So you can put a nice 30-something tire on there. It'll spread it out, make it nice and cushy this way, and not vertically tall. We don't have to focus on the fork. Okay, so let's talk about brake compatibility. So there are some folks that are not a big fan of flat mount brakes, but they are prolific through the road and gravel world. So it's just a matter of how they mount to the fork and the chainstay. But the thing is, some argue that it just doesn't leave enough room to make adjustments and stuff. So buyer beware. If you like flat mounts, you're happy. 140 and 160 adapters are available separately. Now, for the frame in the rear triangle, the chainstay, one of the things that when you're building these bikes, it's a steel bike, so you don't need this big, massive chainstay in the back. So you need really short brake bolts. Otherwise, you know, as you're trying to thread it into the caliper body, you're just going to have this huge gap, and the bolt bottoms out. So you just need to source those ahead of time, because as you go to build a bike, you're like, oh, geez. And this happened to me, so it can happen to anyone. Let's talk about, we're going to cut this video short, and we'll do a different video when we talk about geometries and stuff. But these are the sizes available. And for the time being, as we go back up here, extra small, small, medium, and large are the only sizes at the distributors at the moment. And then extra large and double X are going to be available in October time frame. Now, I might have mentioned this already. I've been talking to several people throughout the day. This first batch is very, very low numbers. The next batch is spring 2025. And that's, you know, one of my distributors is talking like December for some of the common sizes. So we're in July 30th, so who knows how long that's going to be. Now, we're not going to talk about geometry in this video just because it's already getting long at about 24 minutes, 25 minutes. So we'll see how much ends up on the editing floor. But thank you so much for tuning in. Anyway, I appreciate you watching. Please like and subscribe. Share my videos as well. Hit that notification bell so you know when I've released more. And in the meantime, we'll see you up the road.